There's been a lot of rumours swirling for AMD and Intel's next generation processors, and in this video I'm going to give you guys some updates concerning both Zen 5 and Intel's Arrow Lake, particularly in regards to clock frequencies. Both next generation architectures are shaping up to be extremely impressive, as well as interesting, for a number of reasons, and it will be nothing short of fascinating to see how these products fare in actual benchmarks, especially versus one another as well as their predecessors. This is particularly even more true because there are going to be some changes that perhaps have surprised many of us. Lion Cove, which is the performance cores in Arrow Lake, for example, are rumoured to remove hyperthreading. So without further ado, let's get into some updates after this message from the video's sponsor. If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by WhoKeys.com, and they have an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as home keys. Yeah, and they also of course sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out WhoKeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices. Real quick, this should be the last video that I won't be on camera for. Basically, I was doing some kind of prep work for the office and making some changes and tidying up and just kind of sorting stuff out since I've moved, but things will be back to normal in the next day or so. Well, as I've said before, as normal as I can be anyway. But let's get into some Zen 5 stuff first. Recently I leaked a number of benchmarks for the Ryzen iteration of Zen 5 for 6 to 16 cores. Now these are Cinebench R23 results, and I feel that they were very impressive. Now I wasn't fully certain of the benchmarking conditions, for example what the memory speed was and power and all of that stuff, but I will say that from what I understand the results were legit. I ran them by a couple of different people, and it does seem Zen 5 have, well, let's just say really surpassed my expectation, particularly when it comes to IPC. The gains are very large. This is shaping up to be a very interesting architecture. AMD's engineers have really pulled the rabbit out of a hat here, kind of like a Zen 2 to Zen 3 moment. Zen 4 was focused on minor architecture tweaks, and instead really ramped up clock frequency. Zen 5 though goes the other way. Now, one piece of pushback I've received, however, comes from clock frequencies. Remember, we are not dealing with final production silicon here. This is engineering samples. So the results I've received so far, I believe, are A0ES chips, and these seem to be the ones that's floating around. Now, my sources told me that the final clock frequency for Zen 5 seems to be aiming around 6 GHz. However, this is probably only 1 to 2 threads loaded, but I've now got sources telling me that this is probably not true. Now, whether AMD have missed the targets, and for the record, this would certainly not be the first time that a company have missed clock targets, they sometimes could be very ambitious, or whether the information that I'd received previously, or this information of not hitting 6 GHz is not true, I can't be certain. But I think that it's more likely at this stage Zen 5's clock frequency for Ryzen desktop, I want to stress, for Ryzen desktop Zen 5, is probably going to be about the same as Zen 4, possibly a little bit slower. And no, I'm not referring to, 700 MHz or 1000 MHz slower, but certainly perhaps a little bit slower. Obviously, when it comes to clock frequency and Ryzen, there is a lot of tuning and tweaking that you can do, which is well outside the scope of this video to really discuss, and you guys know about it anyway. However, the power consumption figures of Zen 5 will be identical on AM5 as Zen 4, whereas the server processors, from what I understand anyway, can get a higher TDP by around 100 watts. So obviously that means that AMD do have some additional headroom there to ramp up clock frequencies. I also just want to talk to you guys briefly about Sarlak. I'm not going to go over the specifications and performance targets too much here, but what I do want to talk about is a couple of products which are allegedly going to feature this chip. Now Sarlak, Sarlak is going to be the Halo chip in Strix Point, And it is, I believe, going to be a very interesting proposition for many customers. Now, I've only received this information from a single source and so far have not been able to confirm it with someone else, so do take this with a truckload of salt. I'm simply throwing this in as a bonus, but the first laptops which feature Sarlak allegedly will be Asus tough gaming ones. Now, specifications, of course, will come in different configurations, for example, memory, but we're looking at both 24 and 48 GB configurations. These are going to be LPDDR5, and they will come with options including a 99 watt-hour battery. This will be a 12-core and 32 CU configuration, as well as a 16-core and 40 CU configuration. And of course, there will also be smart shift power as well, which will go from low 130 watts up to 180, obviously, if you are running this plugged into the wall. Now let's jump to the other side of the fence, Intel. So let's hop to the other side of the fence, namely Intel's Arrow Lake. Now, it does seem that some aspects of Arrow Lake, for example, Lion Cove removing hyperthreading. Remember, Lion Cove is the performance cores or big cores, whatever you want to call them, in the heterogeneous architecture. And hyperthreading, of course, being removed will be certainly very interesting. I was also told that clock frequency predictions, and yes, when it comes to clock frequency, just like I said with Ryzen, it's quite early at the moment, but they don't seem to be particularly high. So what is not particularly high? Are we talking 5.3 gigahertz? What? Well, I was told that single thread numbers for Intel's Arrow Lake so far are predicted to be low to mid 4 gigahertz. Now again, that is single thread. I would really hope this isn't true, but it has been told to me by a couple of sources. Now clearly this is a huge reduction in clock frequency. It is, however, with a couple of caveats. The first is that architecture efficiency has gone up significantly, even versus Meteor Lake. And the other point as well is that IPC gains are pretty damn significant. So it definitely will be more performant than, let's say, the 12th or 13th generation processors. It is just doing so simply by the virtue of massive IPC gains rather than actually clock frequency as well. It'll be very interesting to see what we can actually get out of this in desktop form if you're willing to just, you know, crank up the wattage to absurd numbers and you have the cooler to handle it. But interestingly, one Raichu actually posted something back in December, and this didn't actually get too much traction from the internet at large, but you can basically see here that there is a wider architecture. From essentially what I've heard anyway, and Raichu seems to be backing it up here, Intel are adding another 256-bit ALU to the cores. I also recently covered the fact that L2 cache is going to be significantly larger, it's 50%, according to the amazingly named Golden Pig upgrade. Again, I just covered this recently, but I'm also told that there are some significant L1 changes. I'm not quite certain what they are, only things like cache hierarchy have allegedly changed quite significantly. L3, though, to my understanding, hasn't seen any major touches. It seems to be pretty much identical. I think from what I'm hearing so far, Zen 5 is probably going to be more performant. And again, I stress this is in reference to desktop. This is, however, predictions based upon people that have access to stuff and, you know, leaked me things. But obviously, at the end of the day, this is not final production silicon with final BIOSes and so on and so on. So anything can happen, but it's going to be very interesting to see how these processors actually compare against one another, particularly when it comes to just loading up a ton of threads. And also things like games, because obviously, you know, games can really differ in the amount of threads that are being loaded up. So it's going to be extremely interesting to see how all of this changes. Obviously, the results that I've heard with Zen 5 Ryzen, this is not the X3D variant, so it's going to be extremely interesting to see how that plays out, the X3D Ryzen CPUs for Zen 5. But anyway, I think that's just about it for this video. I just wanted to talk to you guys about some of these smaller updates. Obviously, this is just a quicker video, but I will be going into a lot more detail of a lot more stuff very soon. With that said, take care of yourselves, have an amazing day. Bye for now.